Good evening, everyone. I would like to welcome you all to the Cambridge City Council's Housing Scrutiny Committee. My name is Councillor Tithala Varki, and I am the chair of this committee, a meeting taking place at 5:30 p.m. on 22nd September 2022. I will roll call councillors alphabetically by surname to ensure they are present. We have received apologies from Lulu Agate, tenant representative. Please advise if you know of any apologies. Now, are you present, Councillor Bajent? Are you present, Councillor Gonthorpe?
Here.
Councillor Hollowwood?
Yeah.
Councillor Howard? Councillor Lee?
Present.
Councillor Porter?
Present, Chair.
Councillor Pound?
Yes, present.
Councillor Robertson?
Present.
Tithala Varki is me, finally, and the Executive Councillor for Housing, Councillor Baird.
Present.
I will roll call the tenants and leaseholders representative alphabetically by surname. Christabel Amitier.
Present.
She is attending this meeting virtually by Microsoft Teams. While she can contribute to debate, she will be unable to vote as she is not present in person. Are you present, Christabel Amitier? Sorry, I'm
Yes.
repeating it, sorry. Diane Best, sorry.
Present, Chair.
Manti Powell,
Present, Chair.
Diana Mins,
Present, Chair.
and Colin Stephen. Have I pronounced it wrongly? Colin Stevens. The officers permanently present throughout this meeting are Director of the Neighborhood and Communities, Jane Wilson, Director of Enterprise and Sustainable Development, Fiona Barron, Committee Manager, Sarah Steed, Meeting Producer, Boris Herzog. Other officers, public speakers will join us throughout the course of this meeting, and I will introduce them at the start of the relevant agenda item. Housekeeping. Copies of the agenda can be found on the City Council's website under committee meetings, minutes and agendas. Please try to refer to the specific page and paragraph number with the agenda. Please ensure that you have switched off or silenced any other devices you have so that they do not interrupt the proceedings. When you are invited to address the meeting, please make sure your microphone is switched on. When you finish addressing the meeting, please turn off your microphone immediately. Speak slowly and clearly, and please do not talk over or interrupt anyone. If anyone has any problem in hearing me throughout the meeting, please alert me by waving their hands or advising a council officer. Please can those present in the council chamber note, everything on your desk, including your laptop screen, is likely to be broadcasted at some point. The camera follows the microphone being switched on, so councillors and officers are requested to wait a couple of seconds before speaking to allow the camera to catch up. Please raise your hands if you wish to speak. Please can those participating in the meeting via Teams indicate that you wish to speak via the chat column or raised hand option. Please do not use the chat column for any other purpose. The meeting chat is neither confidential nor private and can be subject to a freedom of information or data protection request. Make sure that your device is fully charged and that you switched your microphone off unless you are invited to speak. Please use the headset if available when speaking and hold the microphone close to your mouth. Could all virtual meeting participants turn their cameras off until we come to the agenda item that you are speaking on? If a report officer drops out from the committee due to poor broadcast signal, The senior officer present will take over their representation or report and respond to the questions. Meeting procedure. The committee will receive an oral presentation from officers. Members of the committee will then discuss the report and vote on the recommendations. Tenants and leaseholders representative will participate on the debate on agenda item, but may only vote on items in part one of the agenda. Part one of the meeting will be chaired by the tenant leaseholders representative. I will then chair part two of the agenda. Following the vote of the committee, the executive councillor as the decision maker will be asked if they agree to the decision. Reordering agenda. Under paragraph 4.2.1 of the councillor procedure rules, as chair, I am exercising my discretion to alter the order of the agenda item. Agenda item 12 will be brought forward and considered after agenda item 4. Moving on to the agenda, item 2, please could the committee members advise, sorry. Do you want to say something?
I was just going to.
Please could the committee members advise if they have any declaration of interest in identifying which agenda item they are, their declaration related to.
Hold on, wrong one. Oh, yes, I've got declaration of interest in relation to item 6, the futures of the tenants' contents insurance scheme, because I have, and you'll see, I'm maybe one of the few people who have subscribed to the tenants' insurance scheme. So for that item, as chair, for that part one, I'll leave the room and let you all discuss it amongst yourselves.
Anyone else? You have an interest on this. I tenant with the particular insurance, so I will be leaving the room and I will not take part in the debate.
Sorry. Oh, and myself as well. Item 6, declaration of interest of the contents insurance. I'll be leaving as well.
Agenda item 3, minutes of the 21st June 2022 meeting have been submitted to this meeting for approval. If there are any concerns, please could members raise them now, otherwise they will be approved as correct record. So that has been approved. Now we move to agenda item 4, public questions. The public question section lasts for 30 minutes and can be extended at any discretion, at my discretion, sorry. Public speakers have 3 minutes to speak with the additional 2 minutes for follow-up questions. The committee manager will advise when you reach the end of the speaking period, either the executive councillor or an officer will respond. If a person is not able to attend to ask a question, an officer may read it on their behalf. It's time permitting in the public question section. Addressing the committee, the public speaker are welcome to stay and listen to the rest of the meeting, but do not have to do so. Public speakers are not entitled to address the committee at any other point in the meeting. Should a member of the public try to speak at a point that they are not permitted to do so, they will be asked to stop by the chair. If the member of the public continues to speak or disrupt meeting, they will be asked to leave the meeting. Please, can I invite the first public speaker to speak, Dr. Chiodo. I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing it wrongly.
Afternoon, councillors. My name is Dr. Maurice Kyoto. I'm a resident of Eakin Road, here to speak on agenda item 12. A letter was circulated to you on the 19th from Save Eakin Road, which I now summarise. Councillors, I speak for Save Eakin Road, a community group of over 50 people from Eakin Road. We completely oppose the proposal to demolish our estate. We wish for the council to instead investigate and pursue an upgrade and refurbish plan. Councillors, the demolition option being presented is completely disproportionate. It's a clear example of gentrification and social cleansing. It creates significant disruption to our lives. It substantially impacts vulnerable groups such as the elderly and disabled. It displaces many people who have no desire to leave their homes. Councillors, the community on Eakin Road is a strong and long-standing one. We have friends and essential support networks nearby for childcare, help for the elderly. Many of us have been in our homes for over 30 years, some as long as 60. These are not just dwellings, they're our homes. Councillors, the adverse impacts of demolition outweigh the purported benefits. Many of our residents have protected characteristics under the Equality Act 2010. We are vulnerable. This is not a project of national importance. It simply adds more housing. The increase in new homes is not vast compared to the number being demolished. Councillors, the investigation and consultation process seems extremely rushed. Only demolition options have been presented to us. No steering committee exists yet, and it has been difficult for us to get information or updates. Councillors, the resident questionnaire has been woefully inadequate. The language on it was biased, all presupposing a full demolition. The question was, the language was misleading, in particular the term redevelopment, which many of us interpreted as fix up and repair, but which the council interprets as completely demolish. The statistics collected have already been misrepresented. The questionnaire had a low uptake as it was poorly advertised and poorly circulated. A copy was not posted to all residents. Councillors, this entire consultation process has been fundamentally defective. Several groups have been excluded and the questionnaire was inappropriate and ineffective. The council must not rely on any consultation work done to date, as it is not representative of the estate. We request a restart of the entire consultation process, done thoroughly and with proper investigation of refurbishment options. No vote on Eakin Road should be taken by this committee in January 23. That is far too premature. Councillors, to begin this process, we request an update from you, including all steps your officers have taken to explore the refurbishment option, what information your officers have regarding the existing demographics of the estate, and what work has been done by your officers to understand the full impact of demolition on our community. Councillors, in summary, we propose the following course of action for this committee. 1, a revised resident consultation with due consideration given to the points just made. 2, a programme of work commissioned to explore the feasibility and specifics of refurbishment. Our group is prepared to cooperate on such work. And 3, a programme of active engagement with residents which seeks their views and communicates information effectively. Councillors, we hope our concerns resonate with you, our elected representatives. Our request is simple. We do not wish to be forced from our homes. We may be from a poor ward, but that does not mean we should be treated poorly. Thank you, councillors.
Thank you. Officer will respond to your questions.
Thank you very much for that statement, Dr. Chiodo. I'm Fiona Brandt, I'm Director of Enterprise and Sustainable Development, and I'm the Council Lead for New Homes Development. First of all, we welcome all feedback. We listen to everyone. There is no decision on Eakin Road that's been taken. There's no decision tonight. All of the survey that you've called part of consultation, which of course it is just a very early part of consultation, and we obviously had people on site for a day as well. But there is no decision yet, and the survey itself said, and I do apologise if you misunderstood the term redevelopment, but all the survey was based on if. So you may or may not be aware that the council has a house building programme of 1,000 new homes. We have 2,500 people on our housing needs register. We totally understand that these are your homes. We absolutely do. But we have 2,500 people who are in need of new homes. So we need to be actively looking across the city to see where we can find homes like you really value your homes for the people who don't have them, who would value a home like yours to have. So we go through quite an extensive process, which we're just starting really for Eakin Road. So we first look at an internal review, and that looks at the physical condition. And some of the estates we have, obviously, they are, if you like, quite old. The repairs and maintenance bills are beginning to come extremely big, and it's doubtful in some cases whether we can continue to patch up structures. There comes a point where the work we would have to do, even if it was repair and maintenance, would effectively require people to move out for a period anyway, because it's so extensive that we could not actually do that sort of refurbishment whilst people remained in their homes. It simply wouldn't be safe. We certainly have focused on the flats, and there are absolutely, we listen to feedback and we will look at a number of options for the site as a whole and the homes. We consider whether retrofit is an option. We've had an extensive report done because you'll be aware of the climate change challenge. We are looking particularly with the cost of living to try and reduce the costs of our tenants, obviously, and if we can retrofit and upgrade their homes, we can. So we've looked at all the tenures for housing we have. And currently, for those that we believe could be retrofitted, the cost roughly for the council could be up to £1 billion. So we need to look at the cost of doing some of this. Some of those could be retrofitted for less than that, but if you add that to the long-term refurbishment, the tenant turnover is another thing we consider. And in some cases, tenants do not feel that houses are up to what they would believe to be a modern standard. We look at the ability for relocation, and we try where we've built new homes down the road, which are tenure blind, which are of an incredibly high standard and very sustainable, and try and minimise some of those bills through sustainability. We look to see if we can temporarily relocate. If there is a decision to redevelop any site, we look to see if we can phase that redevelopment to see if we could actually move tenants once. But if they do move, we pay for removal costs. They have a personal access to someone to give them advice. And none of this has been decided for Eakin Road yet. These are the sorts of things we put in place should that be decided. And they have the right to move back. And I appreciate that if you have to move out for a period, it is disruptive to your lives. But in many cases, people who move, and if we can move them nearby, they don't choose to move back because they move into they still have their networks and they can move into a better home. If they do choose to move back, they can. That's their choice, and we help them to do that. And if we can phase it so they only move once. But we look at that internal review. We then have an external review, which has a specialist management firm that look at the major repair and structural needs for the houses and the quality of accommodation. So the consultation you talked about was a very early survey. We begin to engage as early as possible when we're considering these sites. It was a very early survey, just what the people on that site genuinely think. You are absolutely right that for one of the questions, I think it was 35% or so said that they wanted to redevelop, but another 35% said other. And some of the comments were, yes, we don't believe anything should change and we're happy. But there were a huge number of comments from people who wanted improved accessibility. And of course, we have to be meeting new accessibility requirements that are legislative and those which the council would like their tenants and homeowners to be able to experience, even if they're not legislative requirements. We need to be upgrading those all the time. Improve security, a home that meets today's standards, modern housing, new public space. And as I say, if we're going to do some of the extensive repairs that would be required or possibly redevelop, then effectively we would probably have to ask people to move out for a period anyway. Eakin Road does have, it is an old, the flats are old, the cost of upgrade and repair would be extensive, there is poor accessibility, there are issues with security, and to meet future sustainability standards without extensive change would be incredibly difficult. The benefits, if development were to be a choice, and as I say, it is not a choice yet, it is not a decision we are making yet, we would be able to provide more homes for more people. They would be tenure blind, they would meet modern standards, there'd be better relationships between the flats, homes and the interconnected areas, more open space, more high quality accommodation, accessible homes for all, environmentally friendly homes, lower tenant costs. Appreciate that absolutely we understand that that is difficult for some, but the council needs to take a balanced view. We are still working on this. We would bring a further report which would lay out the options, the pros and cons, and potentially make a recommendation which is proposed at a future committee. There would then be a further report on a plan scheme. There would be voluntary consultation on any proposed scheme, plus the statutory consultation that comes with any planning application. We would engage with residents the whole way through. I appreciate that you won't have received some of this information yet, purely because we are not at that stage yet, and some of that information is only relevant once a recommendation and a decision for action has been taken. So we absolutely understand they're your homes. We will be taking this feedback and feeding it into any further work we do. We haven't just talked about redevelopment as an option just because we felt like it. We have looked extensively at the status, cost and future requirements of some of these flats. We've listened to other people. We have other people who are coming and telling us they want us to redevelop as soon as possible. Of course, there are different views. We will try and take as many of those views into account. But in the end game, the council will make the decision that's based on the best for as many of the vulnerable residents and those residents in need across the city for space in that area that we can. We will do our absolute ultimate to improve it for everyone. It's not about gentrification or social. All of our new housing is tenure blind. We absolutely build development and communities around it. So we really, really will make our every effort to listen to everyone. And if we do end up having to move out people, whether just for refurbishment or redevelopment, we try and make the process as least challenging as we possibly can, because I know you can't do it without challenge, and we try and keep them as close to the area where they are as they can. I'm sorry, I've gone on way too long, but I want to just reassure you there is no decision yet, and we will take all of your points into account, and we will work with you on going to the next stage.
Chaido, you can ask a supplementary question or a statement. Do you wish to ask a question?
Wish to sort of integrate a statement with a question, if that's okay. I wish to make a statement.
Go ahead. Thank you.
Councillor, for your response. You mentioned the 2,500 people on the housing waiting list in Cambridge who are indeed, these are people who must be given housing, of course, but you are, in a sense, proposing to sacrifice the 250 people on Eakin Road for that. This is one of the most deprived wards in Cambridge, nay, in the country, and it's falling on people of this ward to bear the brunt of this sort of decision. Clear, you're asking those who are worst off in Cambridge to solve a problem that's a Cambridge-wide problem. And this sort of utilitarian approach, the greatest good for the greatest number, might seem good from the perspective of the council as a whole, but when those who are paying the cost are at the bottom of the food chain, the bottom of the ladder, Cambridge, then how can you use a utilitarian argument here? We are the bottom of Cambridge. Abbey is the bottom of Cambridge. And you're asking Abbey to pick up the not so much the bill, the pain of finding housing for the rest of Cambridge. We have 55 signatures already from Eakin Road who state in absolute terms we do not want to go. Not maybe, possibly, kind of. Absolute terms, we don't want to go. Resident survey so far had 57 responses. And even though it had a high number who said they would like redevelopment, that was a misrepresentation and misinterpretation of language. We thought, people thought redevelopment meant fixing things up. Council language here was a barrier to accessibility for people in the estate. So these sort of utilitarian arguments hurt people like us in Abbey, and you've not yet addressed the matter for freehold or leasehold residents in Eakin Road, and this right of return discussion, from my understanding, doesn't apply to them. Those who are of that category will simply be kicked out.
Now, time is up.
Yes, Dr. Chair, I totally accept that I probably wasn't as overt about leasehold owners, but, you know, I suppose the point is this is not a utilitarian. We are not doing this to Abbey. There are an awful lot of residents in Abbey who need a home. So we're doing this, you know, within Abbey, yes, but we're also building new homes in other places. We've got residents who have moved to new homes nearby where they've been housed before, who've been extremely happy, have chosen not to return. For those who have been leaseholders, we have paid market value for the house. We've helped them to move close to another home that's equally, if not better than the one they left. It's an individual thing that we work with. It's not perfect. Absolutely understand it's not, but we're not just moving Abbey for the rest of Cambridge. We are trying to find this. We're trying to find the space for homes, you know, in every ward for those who need homes in that ward, or as close to that ward as we can find the space for homes. And as I say, it's not necessarily an issue of only having to move people out if redevelopment was to be the decision, and it's not yet. It may not be at all, but if it was, it's not just that. The extensive refurbishment that would be required, and you mentioned the consultation, you said they misunderstood, but in the actual narrative, where they gave the responses of the sorts of things they wanted to see improved, that would require such extensive refurbishment that we would have to move people out anyway for a period. So it's not, any of the things that you're suggesting is not what we're trying to do here. We do listen to people. It is it is more complicated, I totally accept, for leaseholders and homeowners, but we do work very closely with them once, you know, we have done all the work we need to inform a recommendation for a decision, and we are not at that stage yet. But we are not putting the whole of Cambridge need onto one ward, I can assure you. We have been doing this type of thing. We've got arrangements. We're very, very happy to take you down to some of the places where we have moved tenants into, some who have chosen never to go back, some who may well choose to return when we have finished the refurbishment, or where we've had to move people out, or the redevelopment of their old sites. A lot of people don't choose to go back. We can absolutely show you what some of the options might be. We will work with everyone every step of the way. We have got people who are absolutely, probably, you know, I don't know exact numbers, but we've got people who are desperate for us to completely redevelop that, you know, those flats. And I appreciate why you may not be, but we are trying our best to work with everyone, and it is to improve it for everyone in Abbey as a whole. That's our aim.
Thank you. Now, we have a second public speaker. Can I invite the representative of Cambridge, Eakin, to speak? It's Miss Emily Miles. I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing the name wrongly.
Good afternoon, councillors. I'm here today as a member and representative of Acorn Cambridge, to demands that you properly regulate the HMOs in our city. HMO licensing is a legal requirement for landlords renting out HMOs, put in place to protect tenants and ensure decent, safe housing. And yet, according to the council's own figures, there are over 600 unlicensed HMOs in Cambridge. The council's failure to enforce this basic regulation puts tenants' safety at risk and leaves them vulnerable to exploitation. This is unacceptable. HMO landlords who rent unlicensed properties are breaking the law. By not properly enforcing these standards, you're sending the message that it's okay to offer people substandard living. You are showing contempt towards renters by disregarding their rights. Acorn Cambridge therefore have 3 demands to put before you today. We demand that you commit at least 2 full-time staff to identifying the unlicensed HMOs, publish a timeline to achieve full licensing, and get all HMOs in Cambridge licensed. These demands are supported by over 200 petition signatures. Acorn Cambridge looks forward to hearing your response.
Thank you for your question. We do have a fully complemented enforcement team in our Environmental Services Department, Environmental Health Department. We've got 9.6 full-time equivalent officers who are reactively and proactively working with private sector housing. We absolutely want to ensure that the city is a place where all local households can secure suitable and affordable housing. And we take the matter of safety and suitability within the private renter sector very, very seriously. The team was increased in 2018 with 2 full-time equivalent enforcement officers and a full-time equivalent licensing support administration officer. In that period, we've licensed over 440 additional HMOs. I do want to point out we have had COVID pandemic in the period between then and now, but that team is still working incredibly hard to get through the licensing of what is a fluid number of HMOs in the city. At the moment, we're taking a very targeted approach using data and looking at particular wards within the city. These include Abbey, West Chesterton, East Chesterton, Petersfield, Romsey and Trumpington. And this is enabling us to be very focused in how that work is developing. The team also conduct proactive inspections of HMOs, and HMOs are brought up to a standard as a result of that work. We do responsive work, and I think I would direct your members and yourselves to our website to pick up on all the support and advice that is available for private sector tenants. We are publishing an article in our next Cambridge Matters magazine that highlights that as well. So we are trying very hard to ensure that every private sector tenant in the city is aware of the support that's available to them, and your support in helping that message to get out is very, very important. It is a challenge to identify HMOs where people choose not to tell us about it, but there is a significant amount of enforcement work going on. And in fact, we have a banning order on one HMO landlord, which I think we are probably, the second district authority in the country to achieve this. We recognise that there's more work to do, but the team is working extremely hard on this. We're very proactive in this process. We're using all of the methods that are available to us to identify and get HMOs fully licensed. Your support in enabling this to happen is more than welcome, but don't think that the team here are not absolutely committed to this work, and we do have a significant number of staff committed to it. Thank you.
Do you wish to make another statement, or do you want to ask a question? Second question.
I have a second question. With our second demand, a request to publish a timeline to achieve full licensing, where would be such a timeline?
As I said, the number of HMOs in the city is fluid. It's taken us a while to get to this point. With COVID, it had an impact on the capacity and the access. So I'm not prepared at this moment to give a specific date for that team to work towards. We are working now on the new and more proactive ways of identifying where those HMOs are. And I would hope that we will be able to come back with a figure, with a date, but we need to do more work. And we also need to recognise that houses move in and out of HMO status in the city at a high rate. And the work that we need to do is focusing really on getting landlords to know that they need to register. And we have a landlord forum coming up next week. I believe you've been invited to that as well.
Yeah. Please, can I invite Cameron Forbes to speak? The question will be read out by the committee manager. Thank you.
Within a city that has declared a climate and ecological crisis, why am I not aware of a well-organised and effective insulation and retrofit scheme? I've lost hope with our national government to insulate Britain, and so my last grain of hope is that our local council will step in to firstly protect our most vulnerable in society and put pressure on landlords to do the same. National government is doing nothing effective regarding the cost of greed crisis. What is our council going to do to insulate our part of Britain?
I invite the executive councillor to respond.
For that. With regards to the council's existing housing stock, we have a number of planned works programmes to insulate existing council homes. The council has a programme to externally insulate around 100 council homes every year, privatising older solid walled houses. The council has a programme to upgrade loft insulation to 300mm in all council homes. The council has a programme of works to extract and refill old cavity wall insulation where existing insulation needs replacing. The council is implementing ambitious net zero retrofit pilot projects to get 50 council homes as close to net zero carbon as possible. The council has and is carrying out trials of internal wall insulation to properties where existing insulation is not possible. We are working towards a target for all homes to be at least Energy Performance Certificate C rated by 2035.
Thank you. Do we have a second supplementary question? In that case, I'll go to the next public speaker. Please, can I ask the, sorry. Do we have? Okay, right. We have another question and it will be read by the committee manager. Thank you.
On behalf of a resident of Eakin Road flats, saving Eakin Road would be the worst thing you could do. In the last 7 days, alone, I've had to have my kitchen sink plug and overflow replaced after it started leaking. And this weekend, my family and I have had to deal with having no heating at all and a leaking boiler. These flats are horrible and definitely not up to family living. These are just some issues we've had to deal with. Damp and mould, silverfish, plaster falling off the inside wall due to a leak happening from outside after months of different things replaced or repaired was finally resolved. We'd be glad to see Eakin Road flat and new and updated houses and flats put in its place.
Thank you for that. Yes, as been said before, we will be doing consultations. We also hope to set up a steering group so people can go along. It's very important. Consultations will happen, and we won't just flatten your home without every part of our this council to help you to make sure you get what you want. And like Fiona said, you're quite welcome to come round and look at the new estates that have been built and see what a difference it makes from the old side. So please, come along, have a look, and you'll be very surprised. And then perhaps nearer the time, you may be able to come in some of the flats and have a look too. Okay. So thank you very much.
Thank you. As I advised earlier, the agenda order is slightly changed, and we now turn to agenda item number 12, a report on proposed development, East Barnwell. Please could the Senior Housing Development Manager and the Head of the Housing Department agency introduce this item? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So I'm Jim Pollard, I'm the Senior Housing Development Manager, and I brought this report. The report concerns sites south of Newmarket Road owned by the City Council and the County Council. Together, the sites offer a really exciting opportunity to create a new thriving centre for Barnwell in place of what is really a hostile environment dominated by the roundabout and the associated traffic at the moment. The proposal sits very well with the work brought forward by the GCP on eastern approaches to Cambridge. They've done their high-level consultation on their scheme. They're looking forward to detailed consultation early in the new year and then bringing forward the implementation of this part, which is important from the feedback we got around the issues around traffic in the area. The joint working with the County Council is key. So a parallel report to this is being considered by the county on 30th of September. This is a really important step forward that the two authorities are working together. The county has been working to create a new community centre for several years. The joint approach is aimed at securing delivery, and there's real concern in the county as well as here to move this forward at pace. Obviously, there will be further consultation, both with stakeholder groups with an interest in the facilities and more broadly. So there are no detailed housing proposals at this stage. There will be housing as part of the scheme, but a further report will be submitted to seek approval for that when the housing provision is more clearly defined. There are 18 flats in the area we're looking at the moment. 12 of these are in a standalone block that is already identified for redevelopment in the local plan, and 6 are over the shops, and the residents have all been made aware of these proposals coming forward. Thank you. I'll take any questions, of course.
Are there any questions?
Thank you very much, Chair. That was a very concise report. Thank you. Caught me unawares there. So, I suppose I've got 2 separate bits to address. One is my general issues with this report and what it's proposing. The second, I would like to obviously address some of the concerns raised by Eakin Road residents, although I know that is slightly different, but obviously it's covered in all the regeneration information in this report. So, when I was reading through this, setting aside Eakin Road, I'll come back to that shortly, I am concerned about what we're doing here at the moment. It seems a little premature to me. So, for example, things like the bowling club, we've got proposals to remove that open space. I appreciate it wasn't necessarily publicly accessible, but it's still added to the green in the centre of that ward, and move it to, in effect, the outskirts, where we already know we've got a large volume of green space that isn't near the centre where most of the residents are. You know, it concerns me we're going to have a huge amount of massing in terms of buildings and new houses and things around Newmarket Road. And at the moment, this doesn't tell me what the KIP, so ourselves and the developers, are going to do to re-provision that open space in the middle of the ward. You know, paragraph 2.4 talks about off-siting of community provision, which basically means moving it out of the area or possibly out of the ward, which worries me. Paragraph 6.7 talks about the multi-use games area and the fact we don't know where that is going to go. The RAG rating, so the red, amber, green rating, is not green at all, which worries me. And I think, from our point of view, we'd want some reassurance on these points before we'd consider voting for this. In terms of Eakin Road, I thank you to the residents who kindly sent round various emails, which Councillor Lee and I have read in detail. Again, I am concerned about this. I have a similar redevelopment going on in my ward, and I have to say, I think the consultation has been very helpful. You know, we've been very clear with residents the difference between regeneration, retrofitting, rebuilding, and I am really concerned that residents, I think understandably, have been confused that some of the terminology might have suggested when you ticked yes to regeneration, you were saying knocking it down, whereas in fact you may have meant retrofitting. I take no view on what's best. We need to follow the process through. But again, to me, this feels too early. You know, I wonder if we should look at deferring this in order to bring it back when we have had a chance to talk to people and follow a little bit more of the process through. So I think it's unfortunate that the papers attached to item 12, you know, do talk about building lots of new homes. And I know that is not the intention, but it reads a little bit like a done deal, which I take officer's point that it isn't. But I do share residents' concern that that is how it may feel. And, you know, these are our residents. We need to bring them with us. I know from other consultations we've done, residents have been clearer on perhaps the different risks. And, for example, as Fiona said, that sometimes retrofitting means moving out as well, but it's important people know that. So I think Councillor Lee and I would like to suggest this would be deferred so that we can actually get more information in terms of the actual recommendations on the open space provision, off-siting, and whether the bowling green space will be re-provisioned within the buildings we're proposing or not. Because to me, I'm worried that doing this now sets things running before we have a final decision. Thank you.
Councillor Robertson.
Yeah. I think while we appreciate Councillor Pora's concerns that we should make sure what we're doing is what is appropriate for the area, you've got to remember the plans for this area have been going on for a very, very long time. Now, there was a proposal with an even bigger scheme which would have encompassed the church as well, and it would have made a very nice big development that they pulled out. As far as we know, they're not available, so at the moment we're working around them, and the intention is to go and get something to replace. I mean, the community centre, East Barnwell, is not adequate for anything, really. Probably was 40 years ago, 50 years ago perhaps. But it's not fair on the residents of that area that we prevaricate any further, really. We must recognise that we've done an awful lot of consultation and talking to people in the area, bring out ideas. What we've got before us today is not the final thing by a long way. And I think that there are opportunities for making sure that we finesse things in a way that it produces a really good result. But no, let's not prevaricate any further. We must get on and get the facilities for the area that they've been waiting for such a long time.
Yeah, thank you. First of all, I just want to thank everyone who's come from Abbey today. I wasn't even aware of this, I'll be honest. It might seem embarrassing, but I wasn't aware that this chamber existed until about 3 years ago. How embarrassing is that? So I understand that to come into this room where it's actually not that clear what's happening, who's responsible for what, who's talking on whose behalf. So just to clarify, I'm one of your ward councillors if you're from Abbey, Green, Lib Dems, Labour, and the committee managers, and then the directors and officers who are executing the plans. As an Abbey resident, as an Abbey councillor, and as many of the people who've come to listen's representative, I think it's been very confusing how it's been communicated, and I completely agree with the statements that were made about this being rushed. And I completely feel that from a lot of discussions I've had with Naomi, who I know has spoken to many of you who are here. And I do invite the fact that this I sense has been put as in the East Barnwell part, the central plan for the community centre for the part around the Barnwell Drive, Newmarket Road roundabout has been brought actually forward, whereas before, in discussions I had, the focus was more thinking about what's going to happen with Eakin Road. So I'm actually pleased that this has been brought forward, and I think it's a sensible way round to do it, that we're not making that decision on Eakin Road today. I personally, and it's a bit confusing because Eakin Road is mentioned in this pack, yet we're not talking about that. So that's also confusing for residents who have come. So the decisions are about purely, as I understand it, and please correct me if I'm wrong, officers, the current bowling club, the spa and flats above the spa and the other units near the spa shop, and the East Barnwell Community Centre, not Eakin Road or the things that are impacted. However, it is mentioned, so I would like to address it and ask some questions. If we're setting precedents here about the type of development that's happening, it shouldn't necessarily be assumed that that's going to carry on into Eakin Road. So just because there might be support for this, and I think broadly I welcome what's put forward for the centre of Barnwell, I don't support the full demolition of Eakin Road. I completely understand that there are a lot of people in the flats who, and I've direct experience that is not acceptable in many people's flats, not acceptable. But the answer isn't necessarily to just demolish the whole estate and start brand new. Why not do a proper renovation or even rebuild of the flats alone, consider it separate to the whole estate? If we're going to bring forward the East Barnwell plan, that's a massive way forward. Why do we need to do everything all at once? So that's what I would invite the officers and the ruling group to consider. And I do have a specific question for the officers. That's whether you could reassure me again, as I asked at the last Scrutiny Committee, how high is, paragraph 3.6, the energy efficient will be high. How high is high? Can we set an actual standard? Can we say and commit that they will all be passive house? Because if we can say that, then I'll be much more willing to support a proper development plan. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Chair. There's a few points to be made. I hope I capture some of them. I think on the question of the linking between the Eakin Road and the East Barnwell, just to clarify that, this is absolutely right that this is a report concerning East Barnwell and particularly these sites south of Newmarket Road. So that understanding is correct. Because of the background of this, we noted the progress on Eakin Road that has taken place, but it is quite true that the decisions on that have not been taken yet and not been taken tonight, and we're listening very much to views that are being expressed, and there are divergent views being expressed. That's one of the things the survey made very clear, and we will be working through that with residents, and that will come back at a future date. We note the point about whether January is going to be achievable as a date to bring that back, and whether that's a realistic timescale for that, and we'll be thinking about that too. Turning therefore to the issues that are in fact for decision within this report this evening, there is of course a requirement to re-provide open space within the planning policy. Open space in this context consists of two forms of open space. There's sports facilities, the bowls club and the tennis court. There's also the mugger, of course, which is not technically protected open space, but is there on the other side. And there is then just a general area of grass which is there, which is inaccessible, which has some kind of visual amenity value perhaps, but is not really usable otherwise. So what we are looking to do is A, to re-provide these sports facilities broadly in the area. We're looking at where they might be re-provided. One of the things we have looked at is what more could be done to build up and consolidate around the Abbey Leisure Centre. And there's been some initial conversations with the Bowls Club about moving there. And that's part of the plan here. And then we're thinking about the tennis court and the Muga, both in terms of where and what the actual provision should be. And there'll be consultation now on that over the next few weeks. The important thing here is to create the framework for this conversation to happen. And that's where the working between the two councils is really critical, that we do need to move forward in step with the county to work together with them on the sites that they own and that we own. The points that Councillor Robinson made about it's been going on for a long time are indeed correct. We are still talking to the church and to other stakeholders in the area, but of course it is true that many plans have fallen apart over the years, and one of the key things here is again to move forward with the councils, with the two councils together, I mean to say. I don't think I will say more about there were some more comments about Eakin Road and how we will look at that, but I don't think I'll add to what I've said about that. I think it's reasonably clear that we're going to be consulting further and thinking more about that. And we are looking at this issue of the energy efficiency standards that can be achieved. And when we report back on the housing offer in the subsequent report, there will be clarity about what those standards will be in that report when we report in more detail on the housing. And we will be working to preempt excellent standards on the community facilities, and both the councils are concerned to achieve these standards, so that is common ground between them. Thank you.
We kind of reiterate our desire to kind of defer this because it does increasingly seem incredibly rushed. I mean, we're talking about proposals, but there's nothing really concrete in here. It's quite confusingly laid out as well. I have serious questions about the scope and the methodology of the consultation as well, in terms of how many people actually were consulted or feel consulted at least. And, we still haven't been told where these green spaces are going to be relocated to, how accessible they'll be, where the sports facilities are going to go. And I feel really also uncomfortable moving sports facilities away from, as we've mentioned, one of the poorest ward in our city, when we know how important active lifestyle can be in improving people's lifestyles. And so I, again, just want to reiterate our desire to defer this decision until we actually have more information to base an informed decision upon.
Just to reassure you that this, if we can set aside Eakin Road entirely for now, because there is no decision on that, this work on East Barnwell has been going on for about 15 years that I'm aware of. This is not a quick decision. The people of Abbey Ward have wanted regeneration of that site, and the sites in particular that are currently owned by the City Council and the County Council for years and years and years. So the fact, and there have been moves away for the nursery, decisions to move it back. County were obviously trying to look at plans for their own site, which was very restricted, and we've worked with them to open it up and do a master plan. This may be, you know, a part of what we do. There is no plan to remove the community centre. It's just repositioning it in a more a better place, a more accessible place. As I understand it, yes, there are things that are still not decided, and we've got further work to do on it, further work to do on the detail. But county and us as a county are taking this report, the report to their committee on the 30th. It is a major step forward for which I was congratulated by Lucy Netzinger, the leader of the county, just last week, that we've actually demonstrated progress at last on this. And I think if you talk to the people at the Bowls Club who are responsible for the Bowls Club, they are absolutely happy with the plans to move. Clearly, there's more work to do. It's not going out of the ward, it's just moving effectively along the road, or that's the proposal. And we will be doing more work on the detail, of course we will. But I just want to reassure you that this is something that for the vast majority of people have been desperate for this to happen for a very long time. And all we are doing is saying we are committed to working together on the principle. This is an outline of roughly where we think on our sites some of those facilities may be, because they're better placed there. And this is what we think we will need to achieve in movements to do that. But there is still further work to do on the detail. But we need to move this forward for the people of Abbey.
Councillor Holloway.
Thank you. Just to agree really with what Fiona's just said, it has been a very long time, this process, and these are some really, really important facilities, the community centre, library, nursery, open spaces, so we do need to get these going as soon as possible. It's also worth noting that whilst there's been great work on this by councillors and council officers over many years, it's also partly, as I understand it, a result of increased cooperation from the county council since the joint administration came in, that we're able to now make progress on this. So I think that's actually an important point to note here, and I just think these facilities are really important and we should get them going as soon as we can now.
Councillor Bennett.
Thank you, Chair. I hadn't actually intended to speak, but I just wanted to support what Fiona Bryant has said about my ward. It has been over 15 years. Some of the children who would have been at the nursery are now grown up and, you know, are planning families of their own. Our community centre is practically derelict. It nearly burnt down before Christmas due to an electrical fault, and it isn't safe to use. Our public toilets have been closed so long, nobody remembers why they were closed. I'd also like to mention something about the Bowls Club. And if you read your local papers, you might have seen an article by Jackie and Nigel, who run the Bowls Club, saying how pleased they are with the proposed move to the Abbey Pools area. One of the reasons for this is for the past 6 years, the Bowls Club has been bedeviled by vandalism, and it's been out of action regularly. The cost of trying to keep it under repair and open has been enormous. Moving it to Abbey Pools means moving it to a secure site where it will be under CCTV, where managers are regularly there, and it will also actually be in a very sort of central and well-populated area of Abbey, which is the Whitehill estate, where many of the members actually live. The idea that it's being moved out of the area is just not tenable. So, although I wasn't going to speak, and I'm only an alternate and not a member of this committee, I would urge you to vote to take the report forward. Thank you.
Can I check? Can I check any other members of the committee want to ask a question? Sorry. Councillor.
Thank you very much. Just to be clear, we don't have a problem with the vast majority of this, and certainly the county assets, as you say, they're re-providing. My question is around the open space. And I was expecting when it came to this stage where we're signing off quite a big transfer of assets to move them over, that we would have more about that. Because I think one of the concerns we've raised consistently over many years, you know, North East Cambridge, St Albans Rec, is where we build a lot of houses, we need to have open space nearby. Because there will be parents with kids living in those flats who will say, I want to nip to the park. It's a long way if we're removing it. So maybe we are putting it back in a different sense, but there's nothing in here to say where. And there are more references to off-siting. Councillor Bennett, I wasn't suggesting the bowling green was moving out of the ward. It was just that it was moving to the outskirts. And it's good to hear. That's very supportive. But my concern with this is we could end up with lots of houses and not enough open space. And for example, when we looked at, I think, Fanshawe Road, we had indicative ideas of what it would look like. We don't have so much of that here. So that's my concern, that we could end up building some new necessary housing. I'm not contesting that. But the publicly accessible open space isn't telling me here where that's going to be. And there's nothing other than a few veiled references to moving it somewhere else and not being decided yet, which is what worries me. Not the principle of development, not the fact that Abbey needs regeneration of some sort. I use that advisedly to mean lots of different terms, but making it better for the residents, of course we support that. And I was on Housing Committee about 3 years ago, and I think 2 years ago when this came previously, and I know this was an issue we'd raised in terms of the open space in that part of the ward, which is very built up, Newmarket Road, the McDonald's corner, or whatever you want to call it. I want a reassurance that there's going to be that space re-provisioned in the area so residents don't have to walk to it when we do build new flats. So I think that's what I'm saying. I'm not saying we're absolutely against this. Of course we're not. It needs work. It needs this work. But for us, the accessible open space is an issue that just there isn't enough in here at the moment. Thank you.
Councillor Howard.
Maybe the officers could just guide me on protocol here, because I'm still stuck with the confusion, and maybe as a respect to those residents of Eakin Road who've come along, can we do something like an on-the-fly amendment where we just remove section 5 from this pack? I know it doesn't form part of the recommendations explicitly, but you've stated there the outcome of the Eakin Road survey in 5.2, which, as far as I can tell, is not really relevant to the rest of the recommendations. So is there something we can do protocol-wise just to remove section 5? And then we've made it quite clear that this is not an Eakin Road decision. It is relating to the land south of Newmarket Road.
The report was submitted as is. We have made it, I think, quite clear on a number of occasions that there is no decision on Eakin Road. I appreciate that it may have been or appeared a little misleading, but there is no recommendation in the report on Eakin Road. We cannot remove the report as such. It was submitted, it was published. However, in any decision, the decision will be only on the recommendations in the paper. And I think I personally would suggest that if in the decision notice, we could make it clear that, decision was not related to anything to do with Eakin Road. It was only based on the agendas, on the recommendations in the report, and only on East Barnwell. I think that would probably be the best way of dealing with it. But I don't think we can't remove a report or half a report that's been published at this stage.
Councillor Robertson.
Just to confirm to Councillor Howard, in the recommendation, we will be voting on the recommendations, and that is all we're voting on. And there's nothing about Eakin Road in the recommendations. It's about the framework for the area, enabling us to get on and make more plans, come back with those plans, carry out more consultation, and come back with those results. So I appreciate what you're trying to do, but that's not necessary. Councillor Pura is still trying to drag us down into deferring this scheme. What you're saying effectively is you don't trust KIP and the council run by the Labour Party to produce an area which would have lots of green open space. Well, you're going backwards in the polls, so we will do what we've been doing up to now. We'll produce a good area with lots of green open space and achieve something that the people of that area who are used to having a lot of green open space, they will still hopefully retain something along those lines that they can recognize as being their neighbourhood. So, right, I hope that we will now carry on and vote this through so we can get on and do the work that has been hanging around. I didn't realise it was 15 years, but that's a long time. We must get on.
To give some reassurance to the residents that have joined the meeting. You do have holder representatives on this committee. We can't vote on part 2 items, but we can contribute. Suggestions about consultation and the sort of consultation that you would like, please do contact us. Consultation working group, which has been working for about 2.5 years now, where we represent your interests on that group of officers about planning the most effective way of consulting with the residents. And I'm sure both the officers and certainly your resident representatives on this committee and the elected members on this committee would very much appreciate your input into the best way forward on consultation for what could be very big changes. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Can I just check, are there any questions by any committee members? Councillor Pora.
I did formally propose a deferral, which I think was seconded by Councillor Lee. And I would, we are the opposition. Our job is to scrutinise, and we have taken things on trust previously, and we haven't had enough open space. So just to reiterate, generally supportive of regeneration, but this hasn't got enough at the moment, which is why I would like to ask to defer, irrespective of the Eakin Road things which have been dealt with differently. But this is on the recommendation. So I'd like to put that to a vote, please, Chair.
Yeah. Please vote who want to defer this report.
That's 2 in favour, Chair.
May I ask who support against it?
Favour, Chair.
Any abstentions? Sorry.
1, Chair.
Now, those who are in favour of the recommendation, unamended, to page number 242, 242. Please raise your hands in support of the recommendation.
Chair, if I may, there are recommendations for the Executive Councillor for Housing and recommendations for the Executive Councillor for Finance, Resources and Transformation. So whilst committee members can vote on all the recommendations, the decision that will be made by the Executive Councillor for Finance, Resources and Transformation will be made after the meeting. He will watch the recording, listen to what's been said, and then make their decision. I will then let Housing Scrutiny Committee know and include that decision in my minutes and subsequent record of decision. Sorry, I just wanted to make that clear to everybody. So you're free to vote on all the recommendations, but the Executive Councillor for Finance, Resource and Transformation decision won't be made today because Councillor Davey isn't present.
Those who are in favour?
Yeah, that's 6.
And those who are against?
That's none, Chair.
Abstention?
That's 3 abstentions, Chair.
Does the Executive Council for Housing approve the recommendation 2.1 to 2.4?
Yes, Chair.
Thank you. I think we should have a break for 5 minutes now. Sorry, 10 minutes. Yeah, now, please can I now invite Diane Mins, tenant leasehold representative, to chair part one of the meeting. Over to you.
Oh. Thank you, councillor. Yes, well, the next item we're due to discuss and have presented to us by Renier Barnard is agenda item 5, which is the compliance update. Do we want the officer to introduce the report, or do we deal with should we take the report first and then deal with an amendment to the recommendation, which I believe is forthcoming, yes? Okay, could we ask, because I think Nick will want to go home, he may like to watch these committee meetings, but he has been waiting a while. So can we ask Renier to actually introduce the report, please, yes?
Good evening, everybody. I'll be quite concise and succinct in delivering this report, and then take questions afterwards if you like. With regards to the report, it covers quite a few compliance elements, and the update pertains gas safety, fire safety, asbestos management, Legionella management, water hygiene, and also passenger and lift safety, and also electrical safety within the report. If I can start with gas safety, we maintain a 100% compliance rate and have done so for a while, with the odd property out of compliance for a brief period due to various reasons, but we still maintain 100%. And I think the only item of note within the report is that we will be welcoming a new contractor in November. We're just awaiting the finalisation of all the necessary paperwork before we make the announcement. Following on from that, on fire safety, we've got quite a few work streams. I think most residents would have, in certain wards, have received letters now asking to be invited in to look at their fire doors, especially for flats. And then also we've got other work streams that pertain to Kingsway, compartmentation work following a fire a few years back, and then also a fire alarm system. And then also we have a fire risk assessment programme that is ongoing, due to be completed in October. But we've asked our contractor to do a little bit more faster and might extend that period ever so slightly. We've got no issues on Legionella or water hygiene to reference or mention within this report. And on the item of electrical safety, we'll be welcoming a M&E surveyor on the 1st of October to join the team. We have been reporting on 2 meetings a slight increase. I think last meeting was 1%. And I think at this meeting is about 6% increase on the previous compliance. So we do have a period where it looks like we've maybe turned a corner and we are achieving greater compliance rates, and hopefully we'll do so going forward. And then also there's no other issues on passenger lift safety to report. On asbestos management, we keep on, we're currently working on a project which entails having all our data on MRI, which is asset management system within Orchard. And then also another item was Hanover, Princess Court and Kingsway. And there's ongoing works within these assets going forward, and meters are still to be removed in some of these assets. And then also Cadent will remove their assets once we're on conversation with the service providers. That is a brief summary of the report. In relation to the compliance report, I did reference the only change is the electrical condition reporting, where we've achieved a slight increase in the last report being 51%. At this meeting, we are at 56% compliant, and that is reducing the programme from a 10-year historically to a 5-year. So we're still playing a bit of catch up on that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now, Councillor Robertson, did you want to speak at this point?
Yes, please. I think this is very useful to have this sort of report come to this committee. I think one of our duties is to show to the public, that the residents and the tenants in particular, that we are taking these matters seriously and keeping an eye on them at all times. I'd be quite interested to know if the tenants perhaps feel the same, or whether they feel it should be just left to something on the website that everybody can look at unless they really want to.
Diane Best, who's leaseholder rep.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of questions for Ren. The general needs flat inspections that have started, I note that the tenants are receiving letters requesting appointment to access to view, inspect the doors, does that also apply to leaseholders in the blocks of flats, in the general needs housing? Will leaseholders get a letter the same as tenants?
If I may answer, so the doors are covered currently by two work streams. One is the fire risk assessment programme, which doors are noted, and then also we have a passive fire protection contractor who's making these appointments. Once we get all the reports back, we triage it, and then we pass it on to the home ownership team, who will then engage with leaseholders with regards to our findings about the other doors within the block, and also the obligations that relates to leaseholders' front doors.
Right. The other question is, what happens when you're doing these general needs inspections in blocks of flats where you come across doors with cat flaps?
Door with a cat flap will be a non-compliant fire door if it's required to have a fire door. So the advice would then be that it's a non-compliant door and steps should be taken to replace that. If it's a council-owned door, it's probably a bit straightforward in terms of making the argument, getting it replaced. But if somebody else is responsible for that, for example, a leaseholder, we do promote the benefits of doing so and the reasons for doing so under the relative legislation. And also historically, I don't think the legislation has been strong enough to actually pursue that compliance element, and also with the fire service, but with new legislation coming in next year, and there's loads of legislation since Grenfell, we'll see hopefully a better compliance rate, but also a bit more teeth for those who would need to ensure the safety not just of the people within their own flat, but also others that might need to pass that door on their way out. So yeah, that's my answer. Thank you.
Thank you, Ren. Is that okay, Diane? Yep. I'll observe that it is good to have this information, and whether we need it in the form that it comes all the time, I think is some matter for future discussion. But certainly, we like to know we're safe. I think perhaps we should use our tenant public and leaseholder publication just to tell perhaps tenants what we do to look after them and what kind of work we're doing all behind the scenes, because I think that's a good way of saying what's done to keep you safe in your home. Many people may not be aware of it, may make people better at letting people in to do the things that they need to do. That's just a thought, anyway. We'll take it to the open door editorial meeting, I think, and say, can we just, Ren, you can write us something, if you haven't done it already, saying, this is what I'm doing, just to keep you all safe, yeah? Can I ask a question that isn't directly on here, and I did ask this privately of you, is will we at some point have some report, I know we haven't got all the stuff coming out of the Grenfell inquiry, in relation to personal evacuation plans for people with disabilities within flats? And I know the government hasn't taken it up. It was a Grenfell recommendation, it hasn't taken it up. But will we as a council see that as a base, something we should be doing irrespective of whether there's legislation or not?
Thank you for asking, Dana. We've taken some steps in relation to that, regardless of the report from the Grenfell inquiry with regards to personal evacuation plans. We've started to look at the higher risk blocks of flats that we own, which is Hanover, Princess and Kingsway. And we started with those because of their construction and their height, not necessarily that they're above the threshold, but because we felt there's a need, because our risk assessment for those are annually and not as per the other stock, maybe biannually every two or 3 years. So we've done that. We also had a look at all the information where we've done adaptations. So we started to look at those as well. And then also we've been focusing quite predominantly on our sheltered accommodation in terms of the needs for those residents. So we have been adding personal assessments to risk assessments that is associated with the scheme, for example. So our attention at the moment has been predominantly sheltered, but we've got our eyes on other areas as well, looking at how we can make things hopefully better for everybody, and also sharing information with the fire service, because that's also one of the recommendations that's come out, that we need to share information more freely, and we're looking at how we're going to do that going forward. So yes, there's definitely quite a lot of work to do in those areas, and we have not ignored it. We've definitely pushed along with it.
Thank you. And obviously, I think some of what we're talking out there about how much we know about the people that live in our properties will be something that will be highlighted later in the tenancy audit report. And I'm sure you may well be getting some information out of that. Thank you very much. Now, I don't know if any other questions. I know that there's an amendment proposed. Is this an amendment or a question?
Bit of both, Chair. I just wanted to check whether you'd like to, I've got a thing to ask, but it'd probably be helpful to discuss the revised recommendation and amendment before I do, if that would be okay.
Yes, well, we have an amendment from the Labour group, is that correct? Yes, and, well, from the various people, and I would like to have it introduced. So, sorry, yes, I think Councillor Bird is going to talk about this.
Thank you, everybody. Yeah, we've had a discussion and we think it's best to defer the recommendations that are on this report until we have a meeting and bring it back in January, because there's a bit of a misunderstanding somewhere along the line. Yes, go on the website, but we want a bit more information. So I hope the committee will accept that, but we can still vote on the report itself, but not the recommendation. Can I have everybody's approval of that, please? Councillor Curran?
Councillor Robertson.
May I just ask a question? I think what you're asking us to do is to note the report, but not the rest of the recommendation. Is that correct? Thank you.
So in effect, I suppose it's just the very first few words of the recommendation, and then it all disappears after that. Yes, Councillor Porrer.
So that was slightly, I hadn't realised that's what we were proposing. I'd put in an amendment purely because I shared the concerns of Councillor Robertson and the tenants that I didn't want this information sort of disappearing from scrutiny, but I also appreciate that at the moment what happens is we tend to call it in because we don't have the information right until committee, so you don't know what's coming. So there was a proposal that we would then, with the Exec Council, that the information would come to us earlier, a couple of months earlier. But I do agree that it would be really good to have a chat, because clearly listening to Councillor Robertson and the tenants, it sounds like we need to do a little bit more about, like, can we, for example, my point was going to be, can we put it on the website with the papers so that tenants would know where to look? So I'm happy to support the idea that, in effect, we note this and we agree to basically review the recommendation at the January committee, when perhaps the spokes and various interested parties and tenant reps can have a chat about how best to do this. So I'd be happy to support Councillor Bird's recommendation if that's agreeable to the tenants as well, leaseholders.
So we're not making this a formal sort of amendment, we're just saying that well, we are in effect, we're deleting everything after report in the first line, aren't we, yeah? And we want to put that little rogue ED on the end of ask, I think, as well. But, yeah, okay, so I think that's really very sensible. Do we have any more questions on the content of the report? No? I'll say, once again, well done. It's a difficult thing. There must be lots of balls that you're juggling in the air, Ren, trying to keep on top of all these, and the officers too, so thanks very much. Right, okay, so I'll just put, because it's been called in, is to put the formal recommendation that we're noting the contents of the report. So can I put those in favour, please? And we're all allowed to vote on this one. Unanimous?
Chair, that's unanimous.
Thank you very much. A unanimous vote and a comparatively simple one. Now, it now gets a little bit more complicated. We move to agenda. Oh, sorry, Jerry. Do you approve of us noting the report?
Yes, I do. Thank you very much.
Sorry, I got a bit...
And thank you, everybody, for understanding why we've done that. Thank you.
We've got a bit out of sync there. Now, the next one is agenda item 6, which I've already indicated I've got an interest in, and so has the chair of the committee. So we're going to graciously remove ourselves, yes, aren't we, outside, and we hope someone remembers to call us in, but it's up to you, I suppose. I'm going to ask Councillor Robertson to come and chair this. Somebody's going to come up here, he's going to do it from where he's sitting, otherwise we have musical chairs, to chair. He's the vice chair of the committee. He's going to chair this bit of the meeting because I can't chair it. Okay. So, Councillor Robertson, let us leave because we mustn't hear a single word of this. See you in a little while.
Right, we're now moving to item 6, the Future of Tenants Contents Insurance Scheme. Could the Assistant Head of Finance and Business Manager introduce this item, please?
Thank you, Chair. This item relates to a recommendation for us to cease to provide the Tenants Contents Insurance Scheme, which we've provided for a number of years as a council. It's a completely optional scheme that we offer tenants alongside their rent and service charges. It's not something we have any obligation to offer. Over a number of years, the take-up of this scheme has reduced quite significantly. We're currently down to, or when I wrote the report, down to 378 tenants that were actually part of the scheme. That's reduced slightly since then to 366. The administrative burden on the council for operating this scheme has increased quite significantly over the last year particularly, and we've recently been notified of an additional responsibility that we'd have to take on to undertake FSA training for any member of staff that could possibly discuss the insurance scheme with a tenant. And we estimate that to be about 20 staff across housing and finance that would need to do 10 hours online training every year to ensure that we were FSA compliant. This would be an increased admin burden on the council, and effectively what this means is that as we go forward, the rent that all of our tenants pay is being used to subsidise the contents insurance for a few tenants that are taking up the scheme. We alerted the insurer when we published this report, or in advance of publishing this report, to the fact that we were bringing this report to committee, and they have come back and suggested that there is an alternative scheme that we could explore where we don't administer it and we simply signpost tenants to an insurance scheme and the insurer operates it directly. We haven't had the opportunity to undertake the appropriate due diligence to be able to say we think we should or shouldn't move to that scheme. So we've got two recommendations in this report. One, that we cease to offer the current scheme from the end of March next year when the contract comes to an end, and that we explore this alternative offering with a delegation to the Strategic Director with appropriate consultation for us to look at this alternative scheme if it proves viable and we can demonstrate that it will actually deliver benefits. The only other thing I want to add is that the scheme that we have at the moment and the contract we have at the moment has been in place for 4 years. We had a fixed price in that contract for 4 years. The insurer has been very clear with us that we currently have the cheapest scheme on their books, and we do therefore know that any extension of the current scheme or any arm's length scheme that we might move into would be likely to be considerably more expensive than the obviously good deal that we've had for the last 4 years. And I'm happy to take any questions that anybody has.
Councillor Pounds.
Well, thank you very much for that report. Yes, it does seem to make sense, doesn't it? The numbers are dwindling very rapidly, and the amount of officer hour and the cost very high to administer it. And people presumably are finding their own insurance on the internet and alternative means. And what I would be very concerned about is that there must be some tenants who probably would find it quite difficult to arrange their own insurance, and do have some backup and assistance to help people if they are struggling to find insurance, because obviously what we don't want is for people to be uninsured.
Obviously, we will, assuming this report is approved this evening, we would help and support tenants in finding alternative insurance. We do have to be very careful that we don't recommend insurance in any way. That's part of one of the considerations around the FSA training that staff would need to undertake. We can't recommend, we can't, guide them into anything specific, but we will work with tenants. We can provide through the independent living service and through access to being able to do things online with through the customer service centre by appointment. We can support tenants in accessing those websites that they could use in order to try and secure the most appropriate insurance for them in place of what they've got at the moment.
Councillor Poorer.
Thank you, Chair. I really echo Councillor Pound's remarks. I mean, I understand why this is being put forward. I think the requirement to train our staff to FSA standards is onerous, and therefore this does seem to be a sensible decision. I suppose it's the digital exclusion issue, which I know you do refer to in the paper. I'd also be quite keen just to have an update to committee once we know, whether we can do the arm's length scheme, what the kind of cost differences are, because I'm just mindful there may be some people we need to make sure get that help. And for example, as Councillor Pound quite rightly says, we don't want tenants without insurance for them and indeed for our properties. So perhaps, whether we can follow up again just to make sure that people have been able to access that when and if we do go with the arm's length scheme, or indeed refer them to private providers. So I'd just be grateful for some reassurance on that. Thank you.
Any recommendation that we would make to move into providing the alternative scheme or not providing the alternative scheme under the delegation will be done in consultation with the Executive Councillor, the Chair, Vice Chair and Opposition spokes. So there would be that communication through that delegated authority process. In order to secure this arm's length scheme, if we did decide it was a route to go down, we do believe we would need to go through a procurement process. There are 3 players in the marketplace that offer this type of insurance, and it would be unfair of us from a commercial competitive basis to choose one of them without going through a procurement process. So we wouldn't know without going through that process for definite what the prices would be, but anecdotally the current insurer has indicated that for standard cover we're probably looking at double what people are paying now, and for accidental damage possibly treble what people are paying now. So I think what that does confirm to us is that we have had for the last 4 years a very good deal for tenants. That's not going to be available out in the marketplace going forward, and there is a good chance that by using the search engines that are out there and the exploring the wider marketplace and the 3 insurers that offer in this marketplace, there's a lot more insurance out there that tenants could benefit from and tailor their insurance policy to their own needs rather than take up something that we've procured that's relatively fixed in its options. And people can choose to add in or not add in a variety of things if they take out their own insurance. They can set their own levels of excess on the policy, choose to include specific items or exclude them. There's a lot more flexibility out in the marketplace than we can offer. But obviously we will explore it and we will involve others in that delegated decision.
Just for clarification, because I'm not really sure what the arm's length deal really entails, it sounds to me a lot like a financial recommendation if we do kind of have this essentially arm's length deal with people that we're promoting.
Yeah, and that is one reason why we would have to go through a procurement process in order to be able to take up the arm's length option. The arm's length option would simply see us signposting people to a particular insurer, basically giving them a leaflet when we sign up a new tenant to say, we recommend that you take out contents insurance, and we have an arrangement with X insurer who you could use. You don't need to use this insurer, but we've got this company that we can recommend to you. And because we would be making that recommendation, that's why we'd have to go through a procurement process. Otherwise, we would be providing unfair commercial advantage to one of those 3 insurers over the other 2. And that is one of our concerns and one of the things we will take into consideration as part of this decision about whether we offer it or not, about whether we are comfortable in making that recommendation to one insurer out of the hundreds that are in the wider marketplace.
Any more questions or comments? No? Okay, then can we put this to the vote? The recommendation is on page 30, basically to approve the cessation of the insurance and delegate, as it states. I see all those in favour of the recommendation.
That's unanimous of those present in the chamber.
Thank you. In that case, does the Executive Council agree with that, Britta?
Yes, I do. Thank you.
I'll just get them back again.
Thank you. We'll get told the result later, won't we? Okay. Barely had time out there to put the world to rights, but we were trying. So we're going to agenda item 7 now, which is tenancy audits, and this is certainly it's certainly a report that I and the other tenant leaseholder reps welcome, and we'd like to hear more about it, please. So who's presenting this? Sorry. Anna Hill. Sorry, you're online, presumably, Anna, yeah?
Hello, good evening, everyone. The purpose of this paper is to highlight the findings from the initial pilot of the tenancy audits, to request approval for this function to be adopted permanently within city homes, and also, if that is adopted, to request, subject to the January budget setting, that a permanent post be agreed so that that function can continue. The approval was given by Housing Scrutiny Committee in January 2020 for the pilot to be undertaken, and a fixed term post was created to enable that to happen. Unfortunately, due to COVID-19, that was actually delayed and it commenced in April. So the data within this report is from April to August, so a 4-month period. Currently, in that 4-month period, we attempted to visit 403 properties, and we got into and completed 337 tenancy audits. From those audits, we discovered that we didn't hold accurate household details for 50%, approximately 50% of those properties, so we were able to update those. The work generated from these tenancy audits has been fairly significant, and we found that in 86% of those properties that we've completed the audits in, follow-up actions have been required. On average, each visit has required at least 2 actions. At most, there were 6 separate actions that were required. However, it is positive because we've been able to do a lot of good things for those tenants. 65 households have been assisted with better stock management. So they've either been able to apply to upsize, downsize, or find accommodation that's more suitable to their needs. In 98 properties, that we visited, we found repairs that haven't been reported. So we have ensured that those repairs have been carried out, and we've issued warning letters to those tenants to remind them of their obligations under the tenancy agreement to report those repairs. We've also identified a number of unauthorised alterations that have been completed by residents, so we're able to get those resolved positively. Really positively, as a result of doing the tenancy audits, we have been able to help 7 domestic abuse victims who wouldn't have otherwise reached out for support, and that is really valuable from this task, and I know it's something that the team are really proud of. 18 safeguarding referrals in total have been made as a result of these visits, and in 89% of those, property conditions were one of the issues, so the team are working to resolve those. In addition to finding these issues or support needs, by being proactive, we should save the council money in the long term. For instance, by addressing these property conditions or the unauthorised alterations, we will see a reduction in the void repair and costs and the loss of rental whilst properties are void. And we're able to identify issues at an early stage before they turn into a bigger tenancy or estate service issue. If anybody's got any questions, I'm happy to take them.
Yeah, no, that's good. As I say, my question isn't. My thing is that I certainly recommend, welcome this report, and it's in line with what we've been thinking. And just to underline the thing about voids, we had a void inspections with voids team, and we were shown such a wide range of voids that they had to deal with. And you think, if only we had been popping into those properties from time to time and seeing what they were like inside, we would have saved so much money for the council. We probably would have saved all kinds of issues for the tenant. And I just think that this has got to be a way forward. We've got, looking after our properties like this, we're also looking after our tenants. And I think that's the message of this. And you're asking for one. I wish that perhaps we'll have to have more in the future, but we're just dealing with one at a time. Thank you. Any questions? I've had my observations. Any questions from councillors? Katie? Councillor Porras.
That's all right. With risk of consensus breaking out, I would like to echo what the chair has said. This does seem like a really productive thing. The only thing I'd say is the sooner we can get more reports back, so we can, because obviously there are issues that are coming out consistently where maybe we could look at proactive things, letter dropping, for example, the disabled facilities grants and things like that seem to be quite a consistent issue. So, keep going. It's fantastic work. Thank you very much to all the officers. And again, please come back to us as soon as you can when you feel you've got a reasonable data set, because I think there may be some stuff we could move to do even more proactively as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other councillors wish to add anything? Ask a question? Yes.
I apologise that this is a comment rather than a question, but this really, I think this is proved very well worth doing. So thank you. I think this is a good policy that we're putting in to have this. One of the things that residents are always saying to me, and I'm in an area with a lot of council residents, is that they wish that they had someone like the rent collector coming round, looking at the state of gardens, and when they're complaining about neighbouring properties. This, I think, this goes a long way to assisting with this, and the range of problems and issues that you've picked up it's very telling. So thank you very much for this.
Thank you. Sorry, down there, sorry, I'm not very good at this at the moment. Yes, what would you like to say, sorry?
The figure that strikes me most is figure 4, whereas the report is saying 86% of all visits resulted in some issue or support identified. I'm wondering if that proportion was expanded to all properties. How does that compare with the current level of support that the council can either is or can offer?
Am I right to respond?
Please, yeah.
So that is why in my report we are saying that if we don't have that additional resource, we cannot continue with this. And obviously it will be reviewed continually going forward to make sure that we do have the adequate resource. We're working very closely with other departments within the council, because obviously some of this work that's been generated is causing a work increase for my colleagues in other teams who will be picking up that work. We're also approaching this in a sensible manner. So whilst we would really like to visit everybody as quickly as possible, we have to be realistic about it. So we are targeting, our target is 15% for the year. We may need to adapt that due to the volumes of work that are coming out, but we need to balance visiting people and getting through those properties as quick as possible, but also maintaining the actual work that's generated. So we aren't overloading ourselves with the number of visits that we conduct.
Yes. Any more questions? Oh, sorry. I'm terribly sorry, Chair. I believe you have a question. Sorry.
Thank you very much. It's a wonderful report. Just something to clarify. You have mentioned you had somewhere about 377 houses being audited. And in line with your, the footnote which you referred, the Healing a Divide Britain, in line with that report, could you just give me some sort of an idea how many ethnic minorities houses have been identified, or any language support has been given? And what is your view about what is the view of the living condition of the ethnic minority? Especially, you make some significant reference in this report. And one more thing, you said you have reported somewhere about 99 houses for repair work. Am I correct? Yeah, 99.
98, yeah.
Yeah, sorry. Could you just give us some sort of an update? What is the status of that repair work being done? Or how long it might take? Has it been done? Thank you.
Okay. In response to both of those questions, unfortunately, I don't have those answers at this moment in time. I can come back to you with that.
Thank you. In response to the second question, 98 houses being reported, or both of them?
Again, I would need to, in answer to both your questions, that's a data set that I would need to look into and come back to you.
But it's fine. I just want to just make one reference, like where you say, aside from the positive impact of well-being of the individual concerned, this is also saves the council's time and money. And I think when well-being is on the table, that has, the well-being alone should be the prime concern. No money, no time. That's my view. Thank you.
Okay, any more observations, questions from anybody? Okay, well, we seem to have a consensus breaking out, but I think I need to put the recommendation of the report, which is at 2 on page 37 and 38. There's 2.1 to 2.3. Can I have all those in favour?
Yeah, that's unanimous.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you.
Thank you.
I was going to ask the Executive Council if she will accept the recommendations of this fine report.
Yes, I will. And I just want to thank Anna Hill and her team for all the hard work they're doing on this, because to me it's very important too. Great idea.
Thank you. Now we're going to go on to agenda item 8, which is accommodation for Ukrainian refugees, and I believe that David Greening is on the line, as they say, to introduce this report. David.
Thank you, Chair, and good evening, everyone. So this report, brief report really, just requesting that the committee approve the letting of up to 20 council properties outside of the current lettings policy, and that should we require further properties, that there's a delegation to the head of housing to do that in conjunction with the executive councillor for housing and opposition spokes, etc. There is a precedent for this sort of thing. Members may recall that we brought a report on Syrian refugees during that crisis, and I think the report highlights that we've allocated 13 units of accommodation to Syrian refugees as part of that initiative. This, though, the Ukrainian situation sort of sits within a wider homelessness prevention plan that the council is working up in conjunction with the county council. So it's important that this isn't the only measure that we're putting into place. There's a much wider plan that forms part of our response to the Ukraine crisis. Members will see from their report that there is quite a significant number of households now housed under the sponsorship scheme, or Homes for Ukraine scheme, as the government calls it, in the city. So an extensive plan is required. There's no intention to place additional pressure on housing needs in the city through this report, and we would hope not to have to use all of these 20 units of accommodation, but the measure is really there to allow us to avert the need for temporary accommodation, which can be very expensive, and to find better solutions for the Ukrainian residents who are in this situation. So that's really all I wanted to say on the report. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you, David. I should have pointed out that this report was not on the forward plan, but was allowed onto the agenda by the chair of the committee because of its urgency. Now, any questions first?
Hello, David. Just a quick query, which is, have the city started discussions with housing associations yet on accommodation? Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Gawthrope-Wood. No, not as yet. That's something that once we get approval at this committee and once the county council has approved our plan, we will be we'll be putting that into motion.
Thank you, because obviously it's something that can be shared among across many housing providers, and that's what we did with the report on the Syrian refugees. I believe there was a collective commitment at that point, but you may have had more time to sort of lead into that. Yes. Yeah. Okay. More questions? Oh, Councillor Porrer.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you to David. I think I've certainly supported this coming through as an urgent one, because I think it is important to bring it before committee. And I would like to thank obviously all the hosts who are currently hosting our Ukrainian visitors to the city, and obviously urge the government to keep supporting this scheme because it is really important. I suppose the only thing I'd say is I'd be really keen, if we do have to use this provision, that we try and make sure that anyone with children in schools are kept as near to the catchment as they can, because obviously it's very disruptive for children who've just had to adapt to a new school. So I hope that, hopefully we won't need to use this provision, but if we do, that we would be able to keep people as close to their current location as we can, which I hope this would help with that. Thank you.
Oh, yes.
Thank you very much for this. I think it's a great scheme, and like Councillor Porrer, I'd like to say thank you very much to everyone who has hosted and continues to host Ukrainian refugees. It's not an easy thing to do at all, but we understand why people aren't necessarily able to continue that, and equally it's great that some people are continuing to. I just wanted to ask about Ukrainian language provisions. So do you have, both in terms of written resources and in terms of people who might be offering advice, sufficient resources to help people in Ukrainian?
Yeah, thanks very much for the question on that. Yes, I mean, we've got Ukrainian speakers within our own staffing workforce, actually, but we've also used translation and interpreting services as and when is necessary. So yeah, we do call on those resources as and when's appropriate. So as part of our prevention plan, we're also hoping to introduce more kind of English language support. If people are, clearly households have got visas for up to 3 years, and so in terms of their integration, in terms of community cohesion, it's very helpful if they can be given a helping hand in terms of learning English. So access to ESOL classes is something that we, we'll be looking at in terms of the longer term.
David, is there any more questions, please? Okay, well, when I saw this agenda item, I wondered why it was in part 1, but I'm assured this is the place for it to be, because it's just looking at how HRA-related stock, yes? That's correct, so I did ask that question. So we've got recommendations from, it's on there on page 62, and it's 2.1 through to 2.3. So all those in favour of the report?
Unanimous, Chair.
Thank you. And can I ask the Executive Councillor for Housing whether she agrees the recommendations?
Yes, Chair.
Thank you. Get your thinking hats on, not as though you haven't already, because we're going on to the Housing Revenue Account medium-term financial strategy. Always a challenge for us, certainly, and I have every sympathy with Julia, who's written the report and who's going to present it in her usual accessible way. Julia.
Thank you, Chair. The HRA medium-term financial strategy is one of two opportunities we have every year to review the financial position and the business plan effectively for the housing service. Due to circumstances beyond our control this year, every single assumption that we've updated as part of this update of the business plan has had an adverse effect on the financial forecasts for the housing revenue account. As you'll all be aware, inflation rates are at their highest levels for many years. Interest rates are increasing, and in order to deliver the 1,000 homes that we're committed to delivering, we obviously need to borrow significant sums of money, so this has an impact for us. We still experience labour and material shortages out in the wider marketplace as a result of Brexit and COVID, and all of these assumptions combine to leave us in a position where we have a medium-term financial strategy that we can present to you and is approvable, but has a greater degree of risk in it than previous iterations of the business plan. So up until now, we've had a policy where we have set aside, or planned to set aside, during the life of the plan, enough money to be able to redeem 25% of the borrowing that we currently have. We have £213.5 million of borrowing already, which we were required to take out in March 2012 to effectively buy ourselves out of the national housing system and run our own local housing business. We won't be able to, going forward, set aside the money to be able to redeem 25% of the borrowing, and we'll be in a position where we are reliant on the rental streams that we have coming in the housing business plan to support the interest payments on the borrowing that we have and that we intend to take out. And at the end of those terms, we would need to refinance those loans, which makes it even more important to make sure that we maintain our housing stock in a good, lettable condition and invest in it appropriately, looking at things like the tenancy audits that we've already discussed this evening to make sure that we are maintaining our stock in a condition that it can be let and re-let for years to come so that we can actually support the debt that we will have. It does mean we're also more susceptible to any other adverse changes in the assumptions. So if inflation continues to rise, interest rates continue to rise, it will be more difficult for us to be able to respond and still deliver services at the same level and build homes at the level that we aspire to build homes. This isn't something of our own making, and I anticipate that every stock-owning local authority across the country is probably having very similar conversations, if not tonight, at some point at this point in time and around this point in time, because we're all facing the same challenges. I think it's important that we do keep these things under review, and our processes where we bring this back twice a year, every year, mean that we are responding quickly to any of the changes in the assumptions, and we can make appropriate decisions. And I'm happy to take any questions that anybody's got on the report.
Julia, you're painting not a particularly optimistic view of the world, but then at the moment, I don't think the world is a very optimistic place to be in, especially with cost of living crisis, which is really what a lot of all this is about, isn't it? Okay, anybody got any questions? Yeah, Councillor Gawthorpe-Wood.
Well, I absolutely take your point, Julia, about risk, certainty, changing assumptions. So thank you very much for this report. So the questions I've got are actually quite sort of minor in comparison. So on page, I think it's 104, I wondered what had happened, so it's section 6, who has the repair contracts now? Because, yeah, and I also wonder whether those contractors subcontract. And I had another question, actually it's just a comment, page 107. I fully support the efforts to retrofit and improve the energy consumption of the housing that we have and new housing, but of course we do need a full national government strategy and funding. Those are my 2 comments. I'm a little uncomfortable about the suggestion of a comfort charge. I recognise supply chain and cost increase issues. And then I put a note to myself about 1089. Supporting applications to the decarbonisation fund way 2, and look forward to any updates on that.
Julia, yeah?
Thank you. Yeah, so our current contracts at the moment, from a plan maintenance perspective, are with TSG and Foster's. The Foster's contract runs until the end of this month, and we are exploring the option to extend that existing contract at the moment. We have been going through a procurement process for the works that have historically been undertaken by TSG, and we'll be able to announce the outcome of that procurement process relatively shortly. So we can confirm who the new supplier will be once that process has been concluded, and we're able to formally announce the outcome. Both of those suppliers do subcontract work out to others, so that is the nature of that work. They're such large contracts with huge work packages in them, worth millions of pounds each year, and they do have a model where they do subcontract out. And that has worked well with those contracts historically, and the team are used to managing that relationship between a main contractor and subcontractors. With retrofit, I fully take on board your points about our aspirations to obviously be able to retrofit the housing stock, and it is an area where we know we have challenges in terms of the financing to actually fund retrofit. One of the challenges is that if we borrow money to build new homes, we obviously have a rental stream to support that borrowing. If we borrow money to retrofit our existing housing stock, we can explore, as we've said, things like a comfort charge, but even applying a comfort charge wouldn't, support the full amount of investment that we'd need in order to do that. So we are looking for government funding, grant funding, and support from outside our own resources where we can, in order to be able to try and bring forward more in that arena. Your point's answered, yeah.
Yes, thank you.
Councillor Holloway, sorry.
Thank you. Page 114, it mentions that you might look at issuing bonds. I just wondered if you could give a bit more detail about that and how exactly you would do it, and a bit more detail on that process. And secondly, on page 127, one of the recommendations is to review the budget bid process to exclude bids not generated by the leading group or to set a minimum value. I was just worried about the potential of excluding bids not made by the leading group. That sounds like a bad idea to me, in terms of being undemocratic and not allowing them the opportunity to have more of a say. Thank you.
So in relation to securing the finance, the assumption that we make in the business plan at the moment is that any borrowing that we need to take out for new build would be done through the Public Works Loans Board, which is the line of least resistance when it comes to borrowing, because we're sort of pre-approved as a local authority to borrow through that route. When we borrowed the 213.5 million in 2012 to move away from a national to a local system for housing. We explored other options for bringing in finance, institutional investment and issuing of bonds, because the amount of money that we were borrowing was significant enough to be able to sort of float yourself out there and try and secure that external investment. We ended up going with the Public Works Loans Board because, with literally days to spare, the government announced preferential rates through the Public Works Loans Board at the time that meant that actually we weren't going to get any benefit from going out into the wider marketplace. We are looking at borrowing significant sums of money again in the coming years in order to deliver 1,000 new homes. And again, we feel we need to explore options other than the Public Works Loans Board. We would be required to have a credit rating with one of the agencies like Moody's in order to be able to do that and actually secure that external investment. And that's something that we need to explore in the coming months. We don't need to borrow money in the current year. We will need to borrow money if our new build programme progresses at the pace we hope it will before the end of next financial year. And so that's one of the things that we'll be exploring, and we would be bringing back information around that as we take that exploration forward. And in relation to the budget bids, that's not specific to this particular committee. That's reporting back the outcome of a review of the budget process that has gone in July, or went in July, to Strategy and Resources. And the suggestion there is that we would look at only considering budget bids of £20,000 or more, and that officers would be asked to identify existing resources where there are smaller things that they need to invest in. Officers would be encouraged to try and identify existing budgets where they could look at reallocating resource in order to make sure that we're just bringing forward the larger, more material things. And the suggestion around excluding things from anybody other than the leading group, that doesn't change the process we have currently, where the budget that is presented in January of each year is the leading group's budget anyway. And there is still a process that will be in place for opposition groups to present their opposition or alternative budgets. What that's really saying is that there won't be things that will be brought forward by officers in that way. These recommendations in the leading group's budget will be member-led as opposed to officer-led, so that we can ensure that there is support then from the leading political group for their budget, and then the opposition groups for any alternative budgets that they put forward. So it doesn't remove any of the ability to look at it from a political perspective. It's trying to streamline it from a member and officer perspective.
Thank you. Any further questions on that? Councillor Porter?
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Holloway, because I think those concerns are really valid. It doesn't matter who's in power, we always need to be able to scrutinise. So obviously, current economic situation, not great. And, nationally, as you say, every council is going through this. It's pretty depressing. It's really fast moving. Interest rates are already going up, literally, I think, this afternoon. So, and the markets are clearly expecting that to carry on in that direction for quite some time. And I do echo everyone else's calls that central government need to help local councils at this really, really challenging time, because we are supporting the most vulnerable residents in the country. All of us are. So I had two questions. One for Julia. Just looking at the predictions, I just wondered if she could confirm what the implications will be, assuming that interest rates do unfortunately continue to go up more than obviously we've put in the MTFS. So, on the longer term, both for obviously income and expenditure. And then I suppose I won't reiterate the budget debate we had last time. You know our reasons for concern about the budget. But I suppose for the Executive Council and for the ruling group, this is such a fast-moving economic situation. We've got higher interest rates built in for a year, but not after that, and not potentially at the rate they're going up. So I would really hope that when this comes back to us in January, we have quite a clear political steer from the ruling group as to where their priorities are going to be. You know, obviously, we don't know at the moment your 1,000 homes target, retrofitting, passive house, which for us is a really important thing. You know, we need to be building to a really good standard because these are our assets. We don't want stranded assets in 20 years that people can't live in because, you know, they're too hot, too cold and not manageable. So, again, with our existing tenants, it's about what their priorities will be for retrofitting, helping bills come down. You know, it is a cost of living crisis at the moment. So I suppose my question to the Exec Councillor and her colleagues on the other side of the chamber is, how are you going to adapt and prioritise this rapidly changing environment? And obviously, do you plan to provide this information when it comes back for us for the full budget sort of reports in January? Thank you.
Thank you. Answers, please, yes. On a postcard, no, answers, please.
Happy for me to take the first question. So in relation to interest rates, obviously, as you say, there is a risk that interest rates will continue to go up for a longer period. We've assumed the rate that we've got in there at the moment at, you know, around about 3.5 for the long term. If rates go up above that, the area of the business plan that it predominantly impacts is the new build investment, because that's what we're borrowing for at the moment. So we would need to review the new build programme. We would potentially need to look at, you know, varying what we deliver and how we deliver it. At the moment, on sites where we're looking, where they are sites that are owned by the housing revenue account, we try to maximise the amount of social or affordable housing that we can put back on that site. It may be that we need to look at a different balance of housing on that site between market housing and social or affordable housing, so that we can make a scheme more viable and bring funding into the scheme in a different way in order to still have a new build programme that we can deliver at those higher interest rates. We obviously can look at trying to cut costs elsewhere in the housing business plan in order to try and mitigate those risks. But we need to be conscious of the fact that an awful lot of the services that we provide in housing are statutory services. We can't stop maintaining our existing housing stock to the decent home standard, for example. You know, we do still need to meet those statutory requirements and the health and safety requirements that we have. So I'd be lying if I said it wasn't going to be challenging going forward. And that's why we keep these things under review, and that's why we bring back reports like this that highlight the risks and allow us to respond to them. Okay.
Executive Councillor, have a response to the question? Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Yes, of course, we'll be looking at the budget very, very closely. We're lucky we have Julio, who's very, very good and explains everything to the T. But because we don't know what's going to happen in the next few months, nobody does. So we can't say what this will be, what the rent rise is, if there is any, or whatever, until, say, I suppose December, then it'll come in January. And we'll see how that goes. But of course, we're all worried. We're all the same. So we are worried about our tenants, how they're going to cope. So, yeah, definitely be bringing it back. All right.
Thank you. Councillor Robertson, it's difficult to see you behind the screen, so I apologise if I don't see you waving, yeah?
Sorry, yes. I just wanted to draw attention to the rent setting process, because this is another one where we're going to have to make some really difficult decisions in January. At the moment, if we stuck with CPI plus 1% as a maximum, it would be 10% increase in rents. The government is consulting on limiting the percentage to 3, 5 or 7%, and we at the moment have settled in the data of the report at 3%, I believe, as being what we were assuming for the moment. And clearly, if we can manage the future of the budget for housing with a 3% increase, we would do so. But we'll have to wait and see what income is available to our tenants generally in 3 months' time. And we'll have to look at the decision may be that we need to slow down the process of investment in property if we feel that the tenants would not be able to afford it. I'm not sure what we're going to do, because we'll have to wait and see what options there are at the time. But it's going to be a difficult decision, whatever happens. And I'm not looking forward to it, I must say.
That was an observation rather than a question, yes. Yes. Has anybody got a question? You can have observations too, but I'm asking for questions, yes.
Thank you, Chair. So I did ask this in our opposition briefing, and I got some sense of the answer from some of the officers, but I'm actually interested in Councillor Bird's thoughts. As far as I understand, since the time that Julia mentioned, that this part of the council is effectively running as a business. It's generating, it's taking loans in order to build houses in order to then rent. And obviously it's coming under significant financial pressure, as you've eloquently explained. I'm wondering, thinking from a business perspective, if energy prices we know are soaring, and it's now the case that solar and wind even are cheaper than gas per kilowatt hour, has the I know the answer to my first question, which was I asked it to the opposition briefing, which was the council has never considered effectively being an energy provider to its tenants. Is there any good reason, especially now you can get super local solar grid structures, that we could not offer cheap electricity from direct owned solar on our own stock?
And that's a question too. It's an observation.
No, it was a question to Councillor Bird, but if someone else wants to jump in.
Okay, right, okay. Councillor.
It is something that the council has and continues to consider. I don't know if you're aware, but there are a number of other councils who have in the past gone into energy production that in pretty much all cases, certainly recently, has not turned out very successfully, and most of them have stopped doing that. We are currently going through proposals for a scheme, obviously supporting Waterbeach. We have considered and had reports done on the potential for looking at solar on a number of the council homes and roofs, but there is still an awful lot of information to do through that. And it is something that we do keep under review, but it is something that is incredibly complex, and it requires significant investment, and we have to understand why other councils have failed in the past before we make any proposals for this council to be under that sort of liability in the future. But we do understand the potential, but that's one of the reasons why all of the new homes that we are developing now are gas-free, and why we are using as every tool that we have within the budgets that we have to ensure that they are, very well insulated, that they are fabric first developed, that we are using renewables wherever possible, whether that's ground source or whatever it might be, and that we are educating the tenants and the owners to how to manage those sort of homes, which obviously is quite a major issue in managing those bills as well. But large-scale energy development, and even outside of council experience, you will understand from national press how many energy providers have gone under recently. So it's not that we haven't considered it, but at the moment it's not something that appears to be very feasible for a local authority to do.
Thank you. Does Councillor Bird want to add anything now? Okay. Any more questions? I'm going to take advantage of being the chair and just saying I welcome the lowest amount, that the 3% as a rent increase in these underlying financial considerations. I'd like it to be any much lower, of course, but that's the way it is. I understand that. That's the difficulty, but there's so much pressure on people. And if you have people who are just on the edges of not getting support with that rent, a rent increase of anything more than what's included in here would actually be devastating, on top of all the so-called capping of their gas and electricity bills, which is all a bit of a smoke and mirrors capping, I feel. It's going to be very difficult in the next few months and the next few years, and I think we have to sort of recognise that. And we're looking at our tenants, the tenants of which I'm lucky to be part of, you know, vulnerable, low incomes, especially people on limited incomes, set incomes, who can't go out and get any more money, if you're a pensioner, you can't go out, you could go out and get a little job, but no one's going to have you probably. So I think we do have to sort of recognise that we want our rents to be low, we want our properties to be maintained. Well, that's like a bit of a speech, but I think it's important as a tenant representative to say that from my heart, and I'm sure the other tenants would probably agree, yes, that we want to continue with the well-maintained homes that we've generally got, but we don't want to have to be choosing between heating and eating. We know we shouldn't choose between paying our rent, but we don't want it to come to that. So I think it's really important to recognise that if whatever's necessary within the scope of what the council services provide, that we'll need even more help to help people balance their lives and their bills in the future. Right, my lecture is over. So has anybody I haven't got a question, I've just got an observation. Now, does anybody wish to ask any more questions or any observations? Because we then have to go into the formality of the votes. Anybody else want to ask anything? Okay then. Okay, well, I'm going to formally we have to do this strange little exercise of I chair the bits that are in the recommendations are there for the part 1 recommendations. So on page 68, recommendations 2, you've got 2.1 with 3 points, and 2.2 are the ones that I'm chairing. So I'm going to ask all those that are in favour of recommendations 2.1 and 2.2 to indicate, please. Those in favour?
Nine, Chair.
Thank you. Those against? And abstentions? 3 abstentions. Thank you. Thank you. So I'd like to ask the Executive Councillor if she approves the recommendations for 2.1 to 2.2, accepts the recommendations.
Yes, Chair. Thank you, Julia, for the report.
Yeah. Yes, thank you, Julia. We can never thank you enough, I think is what Joe is probably saying, yes. Okay, and the next bit is that I now have to hand the chair to the councillor Vitalo Varki, because he does part 2 of the meeting, which includes the part 2 items in this report. So over to you, councillor.
Thank you. Now, we turn to vote on agenda item 8, recommendations 2.3 to 2.5, pages 68 to 69 of the agenda. Please note this is a recommendation to the council. All those in favour, please raise your hands.
That's 5, Chair.
And those against? And those abstain?
That's 3, Chair.
Thank you. Does the Executive Councillor agree to the recommendations?
Yes, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. And now we turn to agenda item 10, Cambridge City Minimum Energy Efficiency Standards Enforcement and Fee Policy. Please could the team manager introduce this item?
Good evening, everybody. I'm hoping you can hear me okay. I'm here tonight to present our report around the minimum energy efficiency standards and our enforcement and fee policy that we'd like to seek approval for this evening. We have the Energy Efficiency Private Rented Property Regulations 2015 that came in to ensure that properties with the least energy efficiency associated with them within the private rented sector, particularly those that are F or G rated in terms of their EPC ratings, were tackled satisfactorily and brought up to minimum energy efficiency standards of at least an E rating on their EPC currently. And this came into effect in terms of all tenancies more recently during the pandemic period on the 1st of April 2020. Since that time, we, the council, have been working proactively in respect of this matter and the private rented sector. We have been reviewing our data sets and refreshing those to ensure that we've got we know where we stand in terms of the rental properties out there that need an EPC and in fact may have an EPC of an F or G rating have been identified, so that we can target those, which we've started to do proactively, and ensure that they are brought up to standard and that where necessary the relevant enforcement action is taken against the responsible person who has allowed them to be beneath the minimum standard. That is hence the reason why I'm here tonight to seek approval from the Executive Councillor for the adoption of the proposed Cambridge City Minimum Energy Efficiency Standards Enforcement and Fee Policy that has been attached in my report as Appendix B. So I'd welcome any questions that anyone has.
Are there any questions? Councillor Pora.
Thank you, Chair. No, it's good to see this coming through. I think this is really helpful for tenants particularly. I suppose the only thing I was going to ask that, obviously I appreciate the direct landlords we can enforce against, but we are aware that obviously we have lettings agents who let these properties. So I just wondered if the officer might say kind of how we're going to target them, make them aware of it, and also whether there's something we could maybe put in some of our magazines that go around the whole city to remind tenants if they think their house or flat is not compliant, that they can actually let us know, because you know this is really important for climate change, but also for tenants' rents and things. So I think the more awareness of this, the better, really. So supportive, but anything you can suggest we can do for the more general letting agents to make sure they know and make sure they're warning their client landlords about this would be great.
Yeah, if I could just respond to that. Thanks, Councillor Pora. We've actually sought to do a fair bit of proactive communication around this matter at an early stage, where we've sent out communication to our landlord community who form part of our landlord list, where they've opted in to receive contact from the council, and that has gone out to that community to get the message out about the regulations and landlords and property agents' responsibilities in respect of those. In respect of any enforcement action that we can take, should we adopt the policy, in respect of issuing financial penalties where necessary, we can, as part of our investigation, and we do actively with other investigations in our enforcement function, we seek to pinpoint through investigation who the responsible person is, and take the action directly against them. So it may not be the landlord we take the action against, it may be the property management company, should they be 100% responsible for the management arrangements in respect of that property. But that would obviously be subject to careful investigation and deducing that information. The other very important thing to mention as well tonight is that I think it came up in a previous item, in the public questioning, we have got a landlord forum event next week. It's our first face-to-face forum since pre-pandemic. We did do some webinars, etc., during pandemic time to keep our contact up with the landlord community. We've got a face-to-face session next week at Anglia Ruskin, and we are concentrating that session on housing, health and cost of living matters, because obviously that's at the forefront of everything for us all at the moment and very important. And we want to be able to get the message across to landlords and property managers out in the community, in the city, about the importance of these regulations, the existence of them, what we're doing to support landlords in respect of them, but where we will take enforcement if we need to, and also to how landlords can support tenants in respect of the difficult circumstances we're all facing currently.
Any other questions? Yeah, Councillor Howard.
Thank you, Chair. Not going to be a surprising question from me. Why stop at F and G? Why not go further than the government policy? Is there any good reason not to? And an addendum to that, okay, this is it could be a stronger stick incentive for landlords, but is there a way where we could actually turn proceeds from any enforcements into incentivising additional retrofit elsewhere?
I can respond to your first question, Councillor Howard, thank you. We certainly have not stopped our communication in relation to bandings of F and G ratings and ensuring that their properties are meeting with at least that an E as a minimum rating. When we've been making proactive contact with landlords at the start of this proactive work, we have actually been stressing the importance and the impending criteria of landlords and needing to meet with at least a band C rating in the not too distant future through tightening of the government's criteria. So we are getting the message out there about that. And the officer who's kind of leading on this work within the residential team currently, he's been very proactive in communicating that information to landlords and has in fact seen that in certain cases, landlords who have made improvements to their properties to ensure compliance with the regulations through our communication and contact, that they have in fact gone above an E rating in certain circumstances. In respect of your second part of your question, I'm not sure I'm able to directly answer that at this stage, other than to say we can use money from financial penalties issued to further enforcement in relation to private sector housing.
Questions? A couple of questions. We have F and G rated properties. Do we have any idea how many properties we have in Cambridge?
Yes, we do. We believe we are looking at a figure of 277 that have been identified through the data sources that we have, the specific data sources that we have available to us in respect of that. So those are the ones that we have begun our proactive action in relation to.
Thank you. And a couple more questions. You have mentioned in the report that you can ask the landlord not to rent out the house. Do you think we have the power to say that to a landlord? Number two, the similar question, you just said we can enforce it to the management company. Did we do something similar to this, or do we actually can take action against management company when the regulation is very clear that it should be against the landlord? Thank you.
Thank you for those questions. In relation to the prohibition on renting out properties that fall short of the minimum standards, under the regulations that we're talking about in this report, our enforcement sanction that is available to us is issue of financial penalty, and then officers from the team would be also following up the matter to make sure that compliance was sought even after a financial penalty has been issued where necessary, and if necessary, because the sanctions in these particular regulations don't extend to any prohibition of the property, they just state that the property shouldn't be being rented out when it falls short of the minimum standards. We could then seek to look and to use our Housing Act 2004 enforcement powers, if necessary, in relation to persistent issues where the minimum standard was persistently not being adhered to and improvements were not being made to meet with that when we'd outlined what they needed to do and what needed to happen, and we could look at whether there was anything we could do to use prohibition powers, etc., that are outlined within our enforcement options under the Housing Act 2004, if we needed to do that. Also, in respect of the regulations, it mentions landlord throughout the regulations. However, that is obviously open to interpretation, as with any legislation. And we can, as part of our investigation, very much, as I've mentioned previously, pinpoint who the responsible person is and seek to take our action against them.
That's all. Any other questions? Any other questions? No? In that case, we will be going to vote. Recommendation on page number 172 of the agenda. All those in favor, please raise your hands.
Unanimous, Chair, in favour.
Against? No. And those abstention? No. Thank you. The Executive Councillor for Housing approved the recommendation.
Yes, Chair.
We now turn to agenda item 11, update on new building council housing delivery. Please, could the head of the Housing Development Agency introduce this item? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So this is an update on the overall housing development programme. You can see that we're continually starting on site on some of our new schemes towards the 1,000 Homes programme. And since we last came to the committee, we have now successfully secured Homes England funding on all projects that we're in contract on and ready to start on site. So all schemes with planning permission are now funded, which is really excellent in terms of where we were last time in terms of our risk profile on grant funding for the programme. We have 2 further schemes that are due to be at planning committee in October, Aylesbury Close, and 2 schemes in King's Hedges. So we hope to be putting grant bids in for those shortly too. The report gives, as I said, an update on the overall programme. We've amended some of the tables to show you the affordable housing tenure. As you'll recall at the last meeting, we have added a greater mix in there to include the homes of 80% of market rent, as well as social rent and 60% of market rent. So try to display that clearly for you to see what we're doing. We've got updates on sustainability and accessibility standards, and a commitment we gave at a previous meeting was to arrange a visit for some of the councillors and tenant reps to come and look at some M43 and M42 homes that happened. They went to Colville too, and that was helpful for them and for officers. We also have an update on some of our newer schemes, including an update for you on the work at Hanover and Princess Court, where there was a previous decision by the Executive Council to allow some residents to move if they wanted to ahead of any decisions. So there's an update on that, as well as the extensive consultation and work we've been doing with residents there, and we will be hoping to bring a further report on that to you at a future committee. I'm happy to answer any questions in relation to this report. Thank you.
Are there any questions? Councillor Pora?
So I just wanted to check with the officer for Paget Road and St Thomas's Road. it sort of implies that they're net zero in the charts on page 213, but then previously says they're not funded for net zero. So I wondered if you could just clarify where that is. And then I had a further question just about my proposed amendment, because I'm not sure whether Councillor Robertson and the Exec Council are wanting to do the same as we did for the previous one, i.e. scrap that amendment recommendation, and we'll consider it and have a discussion before January and bring it back. So but I'll speak on that when someone tells me what's going on.
Thank you, Councillor Pora. Yeah, when we've got those schemes approved at committee, we were hoping to get some specific funding through the ERDF programme to top up the difference between the standard we were building to make them net zero, and we thought it was a good opportunity as a pilot as well. Unfortunately, that funding hasn't been made available, but at the moment we have still built in to the MTFS budget for those schemes the amount that we think it will be to be net zero. And obviously those schemes aren't yet at a planning application and there's still design work to be doing, but that's the aspiration to continue to use, you know, the learning that we've got and test the net zero on them. And I think those schemes, there's also amendments because the scheme design's evolved, as you can see, so there's now some houses at that site.
Any other questions? Hello.
I'd just like to welcome the report on the modular homes. I think they've been really successful, and just to say that with probably, unfortunately, increasing numbers of people who will be homeless or sleeping rough in the coming months, then it's really important that we continue to look for more sites everywhere across the city. And I know that It Takes a City have already got 4 modular homes ready to go. So yeah, just like to say thank you very much for work on that and encourage to push ahead with it. Thank you.
Any other questions? The Executive Councillor wants to speak now.
Thank you, Chair. As Councillor Pora just said, on agenda item 5, we deferred the decision, and we're now going to do the same with 2.6 on page 201. So that part of the agenda will be deferred until we've had our meetings. Okay? I'll pass it back on to you now, Chair.
Thank you. So the recommendation from 2.1 to 2.5. Can I just ask, sorry. Now we will go to vote on these recommendations, and specifically from 2.1 to 2.5, all those in favour, raise your hands. And those against?
Sorry, so that was 8 in favour. Quick enough.
And those abstaining?
1, Chair.
Does the Executive Councillor for Housing approve the recommendations?
Yes, I do. Thanks, Chair.
So thank you. That now concludes the Housing Scrutiny Committee. Please could I ask everyone to take their own rubbish home, and if anyone has used any glasses, please could they return them to the red trays outside Committee Room 1. Please could the meeting producer end the live stream. Thank you.